Welcome to the Selling from the Heart podcast on the Salescast Network. You've joined a global movement of sales professionals who are dedicated to being authentic and building trust. We call it Selling from the Heart. Together, we are on a mission to bring sincerity and substance to the sales profession we all love. Get ready to be inspired and equipped as we join our hosts, Larry Levine and Daryl Amy.
Hello and welcome back to the Selling from the Heart podcast. Your co-host, Daryl Amy, here today with Larry Levine. What's going on, Larry?
Hey, what isn't? Man, we're really close, Daryl. We're just peaking on 2024 now. So great seeing you. Look forward to our guest that we're going to have today. Todd Caponi is a freaking rock star.
It's going to be fun. The transparency leader is in the house, and we're going to have a great time. And Larry, everything around here is a great time at Selling from the Heart. We get to meet so many friends every week in the Insiders group, and I absolutely love the community that is formed around sales professionals that say, yeah, I believe in being genuine. I want to be authentic. I want to build trust. That's all the elements of what we call selling from the heart.
You know, absolutely. When I think of selling from the heart, and I think of somebody who just walks that line inside the Insiders group, Bobby Keogh, every time Bobby opens his mouth, you don't know what's going to happen, but B, he's always going to drop heart bombs all over the place. Bobby, we really appreciate you.
Bobby, you're a true original. If you want to come meet people like Bobby, hang out with me, Larry, and some incredible like-hearted sales professionals, you need to make some new friends inside the Selling from the Heart Insiders group. Go to sellingfromtheheart.net/free-pass. It's in the show notes, sellingfromtheheart.net/free-pass. And come join us at the next Up Close and Personal. We're going to have a great time. And this is so much fun. One of the key elements of Selling from the Heart, it all really aims at trust, and trust happens from transparency. And today we are thrilled to welcome our friend Todd Caponi back to the show. Todd isn't just an author. He's the mastermind behind the acclaimed bestsellers, The Transparency Sale, and now the Transparent Sales Leader. Todd's rich history in C-level leadership, a passion for behavioral science, and his knack for guiding companies to lucrative exits sets him apart in the sales world. Besides, he's also the charismatic host of the incredible Sales History podcast. Currently, as a principal of Sales Melon, Todd is revolutionizing revenue strategies for organizations, emphasizing the power of transparency and decision science. Buckle up. Todd Caponi, welcome back to Selling from the Heart. It's great to have you here.
Todd Caponi's back in the house.
It's so good to be here. I'm tearing up. There's tears. What's up, boys?
Oh, we're going to have a good time today. And as we get started, Todd, you've been here before. You know the drill. You know the question every guest on the Selling from the Heart podcast answers. And that is, what does it mean to you, Todd, to sell from the heart?
Well, you guys, that's what it means. But let's go into the annals of history a little bit. Of course, why wouldn't we? In my opinion, the GOAT of sales philosophers, it's a guy named Arthur Sheldon, who wrote books starting in 1903, did correspondence classes for hundreds of thousands of salespeople in the early 1900s. But he really laid the foundation for what sales is supposed to be. And sales was supposed to be a service profession. He's got a quote in his 1911 book called The Art of Selling. And that quote is, "True salesmanship is the science of service. Grasp that thought firmly and never let go," right? The science of service, meaning our role as selling professionals is to have our heart on for our customers, right? And to help them achieve optimal outcomes and potentially achieve things they never thought possible. And to do it from a service lens. Our role is not to convince anybody to do anything. Our role is to help them predict, help them achieve those optimal outcomes. And again, the profession of sales was designed to be a service profession. Grasp that thought firmly and never let go. You kind of let go for a while, but I see it coming back. There's a lot of good signs we can talk about, but that's what it means to me, is to be a service professional to our customers and prospects.
Hey, Todd, you never let us down. Todd takes us back 112 years ago.
Wow.
And this is what's so good. And this is why I believe, after just listening to what Todd said, is that what's forever old is forever new. This stuff just doesn't go away. And Todd, I mean, you've been an inspiration to me because you're the one who's got me deep going back into sales history now. So I love it. I actually love that stuff 100 plus years ago is as relevant today as it's ever been.
Well, the thing that's so interesting is, we're all kind of struggling with the economy and what's going on there and the kind of the ups and downs of it. But we are literally reliving the economy from 101 years ago. The setup from 1914 to 1917, the exact mirror of 2017 to 2020. 1918, we shut down the economy for a short period of time here in the US to join World War I. In 2020, March, April, we shut down the economy for COVID. We came back and we basically set this pendulum going where we had this massive upswing where if we look at late 1919 and early 1920, you had massive voluntary turnover, more jobs available than people to fill them. So you had a great resignation. Who knew? Just like we did here through 2021. And then what happened in late 1920, there was an inflation spike. And as soon as I saw the inflation spike happen here and start to happen in early 2022, I started ringing the bell like, hey, what comes next? Ain't good. And I had people yelling at me. They're like, Todd, there's so much private equity, dry powder. It'll be fine. I'm like, no. If we're like, we repeat history over and over again. And sure enough, 1921, we experienced 77% salesperson turnover. And that was largely involuntary. And then in 1922, it went up to 85%. Sales organizations practically purging their entire sales organizations, just like what we were experiencing throughout late 2022 and into 2023. Now, the good news, though, is that we start to bottom out. We start to see inflation come down and we started to see smart growth again, right? But it is history repeating itself. Exactly. That's the good news. There's a little bad news there too, maybe. I'm going to rant here for a second, but Warren Harding back in 1921, 1922 said, hey, we need to put together a committee to make sure we never experience a depression like the forgotten depression of the early 1920s. And so they put together this group, they put in all these processes and they're like, we are cool. And sure enough, we hit the roaring 20s in the 1920s for anybody that looks. Bad news is what happened in 1929? The Great Depression. Let's hope we don't relive that and we're smart enough to avoid it. But again, the good news is I think we're at the bottom. I think we're starting to come back out. But what this means is the next 18 months is going to be smart growth, but you're going to start seeing investing again and hopefully start to see things calm down.
Super exciting. And it is great to look back in history. And for those of you who are not watching the Selling from the Heart podcast, which you can do on YouTube, LinkedIn, and various video platforms, what you're not seeing is sales history in action. Todd, you've got the Sales History podcast, and you got to take us on a quick tour of the Sales History podcast studio because it is an emerging museum full of fascinating things.
Yeah, I think my wife is looking at our credit card bursting flames and like, hey, take it easy. Like we go on the road somewhere and I see an antique shop and I'm like, oh, I'm gonna run through. And like I run through and I'll pull off books. So for anybody viewing, I've got a collection of books and magazines from the late 1800s, a big chunk in the early 1900s. And then I've been collecting a lot more from the 1940s, 50s, and 60s. But I've got things like I'm holding a candlestick phone. This is an original 1921 SC electric candlestick phone. I found in my reading that in the early 1920s, there were offices that were just like today, where you'd come in, you'd have a place to sit, but they literally had phone booths and they had posters up in the phone booths with your script, with how to handle objections, 1921. And they were using phones just like this. It's wow. I look at this phone and I'm like, I'm wondering if anybody made a cold call on this. That would have been amazing. Behind me, I've got a 1908 Swedish American phone. It's an original that's been restored, original wiring on the inside, rings. Again, I haven't made any calls on it. Haven't figured out how to hook it up. But there's books, magazines, a whole collection. I've got a Rolodex, of course. I've got a check writing machine from 1926. And I mean, there's just a bunch of other miscellaneous stuff here that I did just get an early print of How to Win Friends and Influence People. So a 1936 print of that
Wow.
I'm reading. That book is fantastic. It is so good, but I had to have an original. Why buy a reprint?
Oh, this is fascinating. I knew having you on would just be a trip back in time. But in all seriousness, though, is if you look back, so let's just go back to, the quote that you had shared in the beginning when Daryl had asked you what it means to you to sell from the heart. So that's, 112, 13 years ago. Mm-hmm. If you look back then and you look at where we're at here as we're heading into the end of 2023, what are some of the similarities that you see? So, walk us back 100 plus years ago. And these were the things that were really that defined sales professionalism at its time. What still holds true today if we unpack this?
Well, I mean, there's good news and bad news, right? Like the good news is that really sales was designed to be a service profession. You had things like, the ultimate proof for me was the 1916 World Sales Congress. So in 1916, it was the first of its kind. It was a sales convention like you see today. It was attended by 3,000 people in Detroit, Michigan, July of 1916. But the thing that's so interesting about it is the keynote speaker was then President Woodrow Wilson. So you imagine a sales conference today, keynoted by the sitting president. Oh, when the rest of the world is starting to get itself into a world war, wow. That would seem insane. But his message and the entire theme of the conference was service, right? The idea, and Woodrow Wilson's message too, was, hey, listen, the country is relying on you. Back then it was the progressive era of the Industrial Revolution, and the rest of the world messing around with, fighting each other and all that. Hey, we've got an opportunity through salespeople selling the right solutions to the right companies at the right time, an opportunity to gain a lead and become a world superpower by creating this massive, manufacturing excellence, which is what we did. But it required salespeople to not screw with their customers, because when they did it the right way, maybe they don't win that deal, but all ships rise. As a result, the economy rises, and we all win as a result of that too. And that was the lens that was really through the 1920s. Now, the bad news part was really that, the beginning of the 1900s was when the foundation of what I would call modern sales started. Modern sales, meaning the way we see it today, where you had companies hiring their own reps, companies having their own internal training departments, dedicated territories, variable compensation, all of that kind of stuff. Now, as a result, sales was trusted and respected at the time, but we started to ruin it after that forgotten depression of the 1920s. And it was really a couple of ways. Number one was it rose this idea of high pressure selling, where we got into this mode where, hey, it's our job to convince people and they don't know any better. We got to tell them, right? And as a result, people started to get these bad experiences with salespeople and started to repel them more, right? That became a problem. Then number two is this phone back here, this 1908 phone and this 1921 phone, they serve as kind of a reminder to me, and hopefully to anybody who will listen, that it's an incredible gift of technology to be able to have a telephone, where part of the reason that selling from the heart in the 1910s was so prevalent was because we had to have a face-to-face with our customers. We had to look them in the eye. We had to shake their hand. The phone actually removed that barrier, where we could make calls and, hey, if you yell at me, who cares? I'll hang up, and I'll move on and move on to the next one. As a result, I look at these incredible technology gifts like we have here and think, gosh, we ruined it, right? And we kind of, one step forward, two steps back. And when you look to today, what do you see? As times get tougher, you see higher pressure selling tactics, and we see so much new technology. I don't think that's a good news. I don't think AI is necessarily good news. I don't think video is necessarily good news when we use it for evil, not good, like we did in the 1920s. And I just hope that we learn our lesson from that.
Wow, so many lessons from history. And, we hear it say sales is a numbers game. And I think it came out of that, but sales is a relationship game and service. I love the heart behind this. And this is such a phenomenal conversation. We love having Todd Caponi here on the Selling from the Heart podcast. In just a moment, we're going to hear from one of our sponsors. And after that, we've got a brief video from Radhika Shukla on what it means to her to sell from the heart. So let's dive into that, and then we'll rejoin Todd for this fascinating conversation.
Are you ready to unleash your business? Work Better Now provides incredible full-time remote talent that positively impacts your business from day one. Free your time and resources from administrative tasks and from tedious hiring activities. Whether you need an executive assistant, need to staff up a department, or you're a high-performance sales professional that simply needs more time, Work Better Now's reliable, full-time, and dedicated remote workforce is vetted and matched specifically to your operational needs. Larry and I have enjoyed having our Work Better Now assistant, Carmen, on our team for almost 2 years, and she has made an enormous positive impact on our business. Head over to workbetternow.com to schedule a free consultation and transform your business. When you mention the word heart during your conversation, you will receive $150 off for the first 3 months of your service.
Selling from the heart truly means servant leadership. And what that translates to is 3 fundamental pillars: serve passionately, connect authentically, and then thrive collectively. Those are the 3 core foundational pillars and principles that drive success in sales.
I love it. Absolutely. Radhika, it's great to hear from you. And by the way, if you want to be featured on an upcoming episode of Selling from the Heart, send your video about what it means to sell from the heart. Just text the word video to 21,000. That's video to 21,000. We're back here with our friend, Todd Caponi, author of the new book, his newest book, The Transparency Leader. And what I love about your books, Todd, is they actually have transparencies on the cover of the book, which makes me so happy every time I pick this book up. And The Transparent Leader, where did this book come from, and why are leaders struggling with transparency?
Well, that's the funny thing. So I had an argument with my publisher about it, because we called it The Transparent Sales Leader. And I'm like, I guess it's about transparency, but it's so much more than that. Really, where it was born was this idea that, back in 2007, 2008, when I first got promoted into revenue leadership, I the most exciting day of the world. That was always my goal. But I get about 2 days into it and I'm like, hey, I always had a sales process, a sales framework. I always had sales support. Now I'm a leader. Where's my process? Where's my framework? I felt like a dog chasing a car down the street every morning, right? I wake up and I'm like, which way is it going? And oh, I got a deal on the ropes. I got a recruiting issue. I got a board meeting. I got a one-on-one. It drove me nuts. I was way too much of a nerd for that. So at the time, I created a framework that I called the 5 F's of building revenue capacity. And it became my structure for all of my strategy and planning, all my communications, all my one-on-ones. It was the agenda. And when the heat got high in the kitchen, I always had that to fall back on. And then I shared it, right? That was the transparent part, which was this framework for maximizing revenue capacity, but shared so that everybody was on board with the way that I thought, the way that I planned. And there was a consistent theme across the organization as to how we're going to drive this thing together. And it grew. I added all my nerdy science to it to optimize for it. And in the end, it became the Transparent Sales Leader, which is the framework for building revenue capacity on a bed of transparency with all the science around intrinsic inspiration, making the way that in the lens that you think about forecasting and metrics and fundamentals, the way you build your field and the way that you focus your efforts, trying to maximize all that. So that's the book. Let's get a framework in place. Let's not be jealous of our salespeople for having one. We can have our own. I made it alliterative, so it's super easy because I'm kind of dumb and I needed that. And that's the book.
Oh, this is good, and hopefully you'll pick apart some of this framework. But I want to hit on this transparent word just for a second, because there's some. In fact, I know there is. There's going to be presidents of companies, executives. There's going to be leaders out there going, transparent. I get it. but what's too transparent versus being just a transparent leader? Walk us through that through Todd Caponi's lens.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, it's funny. Like, by the way, if anybody wants to do this, go to ChatGPT and go, when is transparency too much? And it gives you essentially my answer, which is pretty amazing. But it's this idea of a couple of things, right? Transparency is based on this idea that, again, we don't buy when we're convinced, we buy when we can predict. As employees of any organization or as human beings, we're prediction machines. Like literally, we do our best work when we go to bed at night, knowing what we're going to get ourselves into the next day, right? And that we can predict. Otherwise, we don't sleep as well, we don't perform as well, we're less creative. Transparency from a leadership perspective is just a cards face up approach to make sure that your team understands what their world's going to look like, right? Consistency, process, those types of things, so that they can go to, like, they know what's expected of them, right? So that's the way that I shared. I shared my framework. I shared my process. I shared metrics that I was focused on. Here's a couple of things to think about. Go back to March of 2020. Uncertainty drives us nuts, right? Like, to the point where check out your local Costco in March of 2020 and check out people rolling a massive cart out with like toilet paper up to the ceilings. I need certainty, right? The role of certainty from a revenue leadership is especially poignant right now, where any rep that wakes up or anybody in an organization wakes up in the morning and they pull up their Twitter or their whatever, they see like there's layoffs happening, there's struggles in organizations. Are you addressing that for your team? Are you addressing, and so my advice to all leaders is, if your team doesn't know what the status of their organization is right now, they're going to bed at night not sure whether or not tomorrow morning is going to be the day that I find out. So my advice, number one, is embrace what you're certain about, right? Like, hey, we know that for the next 3 months, things are cool. We're not changing anything. We've got plenty of cash runway. We know that there's no changes going on for the next 3 months. But then embrace what's uncertain, right? Be a human being about it. Like, hey, we can never know how deep or hard this is going to get as it relates to our organization, our cash flow, the decisions we have to make. So number 3 then is to create certainty around the uncertainty, which is to say, hey, we're going to give you another update in 2 months. So the third Thursday of next month, we're going to all get on the phone, give you another update, right? That's what I'm talking about as it relates to transparency. Help your team predict. Now, where it goes wrong is clearly the things that they don't need to know, right? That don't help them predict. So oversharing things that aren't important. Number 2 is oversharing things that give your team a competitive, or your competitors a competitive information. There's proprietary information. There's sensitive things that, of course, you don't share. But again, if you can't share them, share that, right? Like, hey, there's certain things that I can't share with you, right? Like, that's part of being transparent, is to be a human being. The goal is to help them predict, and transparency beyond that can take them in bad places or put your competitors at an advantage to you. That's where you draw the line. Take it easy.
Love it. Love it. And this is so powerful for leaders listening in. And by the way, just hats off to the alliteration on your framework. Everyone that watches or listens knows I'm an alliteration junkie, and you're going to want to get a copy of the Transparent Sales Leader if you're a sales leader, or if you have one, get one for your sales leader. They'll thank you. Great gift. You talk about intrinsic motivation. Motivation here is something so critical. This is coming out right at the end of the year. We're stepping into a new year. Talk to us about intrinsic motivation and what's critical around that concept.
Well, I mean, for the organizations I've worked in that we've had the most success and had the most fun and felt good about selling from the heart, it's this idea of understanding what actually drives human beings. So, worst case is I got promoted into revenue leadership and I didn't have a framework. But even worse than that is nobody ever teaches anybody about the science of what actually drives us as human beings, do they? Like, I've never seen that for like in a class. And so I had developed one. I call it the praise model. And that's the alliteration on that one, because again, I'm dumb. I needed something memorable.
Stop it.
But there's 6 core elements that go into driving us as human beings. The P is predictability, like I already said. We do our best work when we can predict, when there's certainty, when there's consistency. The R is recognition, meaning we do our best work when we're recognized for our efforts, given status, validated, given feedback. The A is aim, meaning we do our best work when the work we do matters, right? Matters beyond our number and hitting our forecast. So the impact, the mission. The I is independence. We do our best work when we're given a level of independence. We're not micromanaged, that we're given the trust and resources to do our best work with minimal supervision. The S, security, right? We do our best work when we feel safe, when we feel like somebody has our back, when we're part of a pack, when we're part of a family. And then the E is equitability, meaning we do our best work when things are equitable, when there's a lack of politics, when things feel fair, when the juice is worth the squeeze, right? And so if you just absorb that, write down praise, write down those things, and start to think about, hey, when I ask my team about, like, the A one is so important to me. Like, ask your team, hey, do you know what your work means to me? Do you know what your work means to our company? Do you know what our work means to our customers? Do you know what our work means to our customer's customer? Like, if you don't get good answers to that, and your team thinks that their self-worth lies on whether or not they hit a number, we're doing it wrong, right? Like, think about praise. You can diagnose each one of those 6, which I do in a very nerdy fashion, hopefully relatable and fun. But like, that's the science of intrinsic inspiration. Just give your team tons of praise.
And inspiration is this near and dear to us here at Selling from the Heart, because we believe in inspirational experiences. But here's what's interesting is leaders do 2 things, my belief, better than anyone else. They inspire and influence. And what you just said around praise is the inspiration, but it's also the influence part of this, to get your team to see and achieve things they don't believe they can do on their own, Todd.
Exactly. That's right. And, it's funny that there's a quote from a guy, it's back in the 1990s, neuroscientist Antonio Damasio. And he often talks about this idea that we as human beings, we are not thinking machines that feel. We are feeling machines that think, right? And so often, like, that praise model became really valuable to me, because you'll have individuals who are sharing logic with you, right? But, hey, I got a new job. I'm going over here. Like, hey, what happened? What triggered that? Oh, I'm going to be a VP of sales. Like, oh, cool. All right, great. Well, congrats. Tell me about the team. I'm like, it's a startup. I'm the only rep. Like, oh, but it's VP of sales. Oh, so, like, you can start to diagnose that, hey, what they were really missing here was that recognition, that feeling of status and validation. Like, hey, that's a great lesson learned. You'll hear that in so many other ways, to be able to absorb that logic and then to be able to trigger an understanding of the feeling behind it. And it's typically one of those 6 things. Once you start to diagnose that and start to see the trends, you can start to apply, philosophies and ideas to make sure that you're maximizing all 6 of those elements for your team. Because when praise is maximized, your team stays. They do their best every day. They advocate for you and your organization. Again, they'll run through a brick wall for you. And I think that's almost more valuable than all the process stuff and all the fundamentals we can teach them. You create a team that's freaking in it, man. Like, that's where you see the magic.
I love it. What a great conversation, Todd. Always fun having you back here on the Selling from the Heart podcast. I want to know, and I'm sure everybody listening in wants to know, how can I get more Todd Caponi in my life?
You sure? You want that?
No, seriously. Bring it on.
All right. You asked for it. A great place to go is just toddcaponi.com. A lot of my nerdery's on there, videos, linked to the podcast, which is available anywhere. And again, the Sales History podcast, that's just, I nerd out for 15 to 20 minutes on a topic. There's 30 something episodes, and I'm getting ready to release a new one here, a new series in 2024 of it. But my programs around transparency, transparent leadership, you can find it all, toddcaponi.com. Or again, if you want to follow along or connect with me on LinkedIn, would love to have you, and let me know where you heard me.
I love it. We love you. Thank you so much for coming back, sharing your heart with us today, Todd. You are a true Selling from the Heart champion. We appreciate you, man.
Thanks, Todd.
You guys are a blast. Thanks for having me on.
Anytime. Transparency sale, transparent leader. We got so much great stuff here. And man, I wish I had that framework when I was promoted past my level of competence into sales leadership decades ago. What a gift. And the praise acronym was dynamite right there.
You know, we're in the people business and the
Mhm.
relationship building business. And as sales leaders, if you could bring the praise model to the forefront, just lean into your people, get to know your people. What makes your people tick?
Yeah.
Watch what soon starts to happen. I tell you what, though, we can do a 2-hour podcast with Todd Caponi and never repeat any of the same things. That's what I love about having Todd on the show.
Always a blast. And if you want to hang out with people like our friend Todd and other like-hearted sales professionals and leaders, guess what? You want to be a part of this Selling from the Heart Insiders Group. And we want to invite you to join us for a future gathering of the Selling from the Heart Insiders Group for an up close and personal with some of our friends. Go to sellingfromtheheart.net/free-pass. You're going to be glad you did.
No, absolutely. And here's what I'm going to encourage you to do. Go grab both of Todd's books, read them, digest them, and then just ask yourself, what does it mean, right? What does transparency mean in a world where trust is so low in sales right now? And just think about that for a moment.
That's right. Well, thank you to everyone who's liking, subscribing, and leaving reviews on the platform on which you listen to this podcast. It helps us spread the message. Make sure to subscribe. Stay tuned. We have an exciting announcement next week. And until next time, keep being genuine, keep being authentic, keep building trust, be transparent, and most of all,
sell from the heart.
Thanks for listening to the Selling from the Heart podcast on the Salescast Network. If you enjoyed the show, make sure to hit the subscribe button so you don't miss an episode. We appreciate your encouraging reviews as it helps us spread the word. As always, we would love to connect with you. So look for us on LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, and your favorite podcast platform. This podcast is produced by our friends at Salescast. Learn more at www.salescast.co. We look forward to seeing you next time.